All right, it's 2 o'clock. So welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with today's workshop. Really glad you could join us. My name is Krista Egger and I lead our Green Communities work at Enterprise. We're gathered here to discuss green communities in the context of PHFA's 2020 LIHTC applications. So thanks for joining and being a part of this effort. Before we get started into the content, I'd like to orient you to our meeting platform if you haven't been using Zoom lately. So I'd like to bring your attention to a few features. And so for instance, number one, we'd really like to invite you to keep your cameras on. We feel like it will give us the impression that we're actually together in person, and we can get more out of answering your questions and vice versa. So thanks for taking that opportunity. The next item is we will be inviting you to ask questions or provide your feedback in the chat throughout today's session, and we'd like to make sure we're responding to you if and when you do that with the name that you'd like to be called. So if you'd like, you can rename yourself in Zoom right now by going to the upper right-hand corner of your video box. You'll see 3 dots. You can click there, rename yourself if the name that's showing up isn't appropriate right now. Next, please keep yourself on mute if you're not planning to speak so we can cut back on background noise. Another Zoom tip is that you can flip between gallery view, where you see everyone all at once, or speaker view, where the person speaking is the largest box on your screen. So feel free to flip back and forth between those as you'd like during today's session. And then if you are experiencing any difficulties with Zoom connectivity, or you can't hear someone well, or you can't see something well, feel free to chat us with that issue. We have a stellar team on your Zoom issues today. Gabriela Morris-Flores is with us and manning that for us today. And another tip, if you are having any issues with Zoom, is to try to close other windows and browsers you might have open on your computer. That sometimes helps with the connectivity on your screen. And then finally, we will be recording today's session, and we'll share that recording with everyone who RSVP'd for this event within the next week. So you'll be able to share this with any colleagues who weren't able to attend today. So thanks again for joining. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mark O'Matt with the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency to get us started.
Thanks, Krista. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. So first off, I'd like to begin by announcing a bit of PHFA news. Stan Salwalkie, Manager of Architecture and Engineering, retired last week. And as most of you know, everyone loved working with Stan, and his contributions to PHFA were great. He will be missed, and we wish him the best. Moving forward at this point, if you have any questions, you can contact Ken Bobb, Kim Boyer, Wade Romberger, Christy Provost, Adam Kitchen, or myself, and we'll collaborate together and get answers back to you. Okay, on to today's webinar business. I want to begin by saying that in July of 2019, PHFA awarded low-income housing tax credits to 39 different developments. 37 of the 39 developments received ranking points to achieve certification with the 2015 Enterprise Green Communities criteria. Now, you might be aware that Enterprise is transitioning over to their newer 2020 criteria. And to certify under the older 2015 criteria, the pre-build submission must be received by Enterprise by October 15th, 2020. Now, at this time, PHFA plans to award its 2020 tax credits later this summer. That means that successful applicants would have maybe 1.5, maybe 2 months to prepare their pre-build submission prior to the enterprise deadline. Anyone failing to meet the October 15th deadline will be required to certify under the newer 2020 criteria. So the purpose of this webinar is to familiarize ourselves with the differences between the 2015 and the newer 2020 criteria. Fortunately, we have Krista Egger, and as you just met, and Frederick Zindel from Enterprise Community Partners to help us walk through these changes. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Krista and Frederick.
Great, thank you, Mark. So I'll provide some background information, then we can orient ourselves around the objectives for today's session and then dive into the content. So as many of you all know, Green Communities is a program of Enterprise Community Partners. Enterprise, the organization, is a national nonprofit, and Green Communities, the program, is the only national green building program geared exclusively towards the affordable housing sector. Our goal is to help you all create housing that's not just affordable to purchase or to rent, but is also healthy, efficient, and environmentally responsible. And we do all of this within the cost constraints of the affordable market and have 15 years of experience and success stories with many of you all. We launched the most recent version of our Green Communities criteria, as Mark mentioned, this January. And the key point for today's session is that you may either use the 2015 or the 2020 criteria with a project you've submitted to PHFA for this year's 9% LIHTC round. However, know that we are sunsetting our 2015 criteria this fall, and as Mark mentioned, any new projects submitting a pre-build application after October 15th of this year will need to use the 2020 criteria. And because we know that award decisions are being made not too far away from that date, we'll be sharing information with y'all over the next hour to help you make the decision about whether you'd like to use the 2015 or the 2020 criteria, and then depending on that choice, what you can do now to start preparing that application. So because we would like to engage with you all today through the chat feature of Zoom, let's get warmed up just a little bit. If you all could locate the chat icon near the bottom of your Zoom screen and just add a note in the chat box about whether right now you're leaning towards using the 2015 criteria or the 2020 criteria, that would be great. You could just type in 2015 or 2020, and let's get a read of what people are saying. Looks like lots of answers are coming in. Many 2015s, some 2020s. 2015 criteria project under review now, using 2020 going forward. 2015 for as long as we can. Great. Well, thank you guys. And as we move forward throughout the next hour, please type in your questions. During today's session, either Frederick or I will be speaking, and when we're not speaking, we'll be answering chats. So we'd like to keep the conversation going by text if we're not actually speaking with one another here. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share some slides just to give you a little bit of an introduction. All right. So here we are in this session to discuss the 2015 and 2020 criteria in the context of PHFA's LIHTC round. By the end of today's workshop, our aim is that you will be able to do these three things. First, evaluate whether to use the 2015 or the 2020 criteria based on your project goals and timeline. That you'll be able to identify steps to take now and in the fall, should you choose to use the 2015 criteria with that short turnaround. And then also that you'll be able to identify critical details of the 2020 criteria and supporting resources to get you prepared to go down that path in the future. The Enterprise Green Communities criteria has changed a few times over the years. You can see a picture here of the cover of our most recent versions. And while the content has changed over the years within the format that you're familiar with Green Communities, what has remained constant throughout every iteration of our criteria are these set of guiding principles. So we've relied on ensuring that the criteria is achievable for all affordable housing development types. So that means new construction as well as rehab, single family as well as low and mid-rise, multifamily, urban as well as rural. We've ensured that the criteria is cost effective and relies on proven strategies, that we're not experimenting with the affordable housing sector with any unproven green building approaches that might unduly harm your projects or cause gross expense. We've ensured that the criteria is designed to deliver significant health, economic, and environmental benefits, that it's based on technically sound and rigorous standards, and that every measure in the criteria is measurable and verifiable. So you can know for yourself whether or not you're on the right track with succeeding. So to create the 2020 criteria, we started by actually editing the 2015 criteria. Hold on one second. Got a technical detail here. Well, we started by editing the 2015 criteria with any questions that we'd received over the previous 5 years about how to implement it. So we ended up with a redlined version of the 2015 criteria as our starting place for 2020 with the same format and the same approach with 8 categories. Then we confirmed which themes we intended to focus in on with the 2020 criteria, and I'll go over those later today. We conducted an industry scan to base our updates in best practices in the market today. Then we convened 3 working groups of green building subject matter experts, policy stakeholders, and affordable housing stakeholders to ensure that our content was both ambitious yet achievable for the affordable housing sector. We held a public comment period last year to get public feedback from anyone who was willing to provide it on what we had developed. Then we finalized the criteria, allocated points across all the optional measures, then went into design and released the criteria early this year. So the result is the 2020 Green Communities criteria, which is the cover of which is on the right-hand side of your screen here. And some similarities to the 2015 criteria are the same general approach with 8 categories, the same key principles, but there are some significant differences that we'll be sharing with you all today. And when it comes to the certification process, whether or not you're using the 2015 or the 2020 version, the process really hasn't changed. We still have 2 phases, starting with pre-build before design is finalized, before construction begins, and then post-build right after the building is placed in service. Certification for both the 2015 and the 2020 criteria is also housed within our online certification portal. It's been updated to include the 2020 criteria. So when you go into the portal today to begin a new project, one of the first questions you'll be asked is which version you would like to use. So with those 2 steps, we'll be walking through details with you all today about key details to focus in on with your pre-build application if you would like to submit one with the 2015 criteria before October of this year. And then I'll follow up with an orientation to the highlights of the 2020 criteria and some key details about what preparing for a successful pre-build application looks like in that context. So I'm going to stop sharing slides now. And Frederick, have any questions come in that we should address before we move on to the next phase?
Someone just asked if we would be sharing the presentation after the event. I said that would be okay. So we'll be sure to do that after.
Great. Yeah, that's right. We'll share the recording, which will include the slides. Terrific. So again, thank you all for joining. We're glad to have the diverse set of skills and expertise on the line today. Look forward to chatting with you and sharing with you a little bit about the 2015 and the 2020 criteria. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Frederick.
Great. Just went ahead and shared my slides. All right. Well, thank you, Krista, for that introduction, and hello, everyone. My name is Frederick Zindel, and I'm a program officer on our Green Communities team, where I focus on our customer engagement, certification reviews, and some other projects relating to resilience and program management. So today I'm going to give a brief high-level overview of the 2015 criteria and provide some guidance on what you can do today to prepare yourselves for a successful pre-built submission if you choose to use the 2015 version come the time of your award letters. And as Krista and Mark mentioned before, you can pursue either 2015 or 2020 for the funding being awarded in August. However, we are retiring our 2015 criteria as of October 15th this year, and thought it would be important for you all when deciding which version you want to follow to know what you can do now to prepare yourself so you're able to submit a full application prior to October 15th. So our 2015 criteria takes from the collective experience of affordable housing developers and delivers a clear, cost-effective framework for affordable housing. And before we go a little further into this, I would like to share a video with you that kind of gives a brief overview of our online portal and certification process, which will be really helpful for folks who aren't as familiar with our program. Okay.
When you're developing green, affordable housing, you're balancing a lot. And the Enterprise Green Communities Certification Portal has been designed to help. You'll work through 2 phases, pre-build and post-build. Apply for pre-build at least 30 days before construction and post-build within 60 days of completion. First, create an account. Once logged in, you'll see 3 tabs: Green Certification Details, Green Portfolio Overview, and Certification Map. To start an application, go to Green Certification Details and click on New Certification. Assign your project a name and select a template. Not in New York City? Choose the national template. Select your construction type: new construction, moderate rehab, or substantial rehab, where the work area exceeds 50% of the aggregate area of the building. Next, select your project setting. Not sure of suitability? Visit the USDA's Rural Eligibility website and type in the address. The correct template and construction type are critical. They determine the application fields for your submission and can't be changed in the future. Now you'll be able to input project information and capture your criteria compliance. This is your hub for tracking everything related to your certification, but it's also a tool to assist you in the process. You can view compliance, exemptions, rationale, recommendations, and resources for each criterion. And as the project progresses, you can enter new information and upload documentation. You'll be able to track certification points and choose which goals make sense for your project. Once you've submitted your application, it enters a 30-day review period. Afterwards, you'll either receive an approval by email or a request for more information. To revise your application, return to criteria compliance. Message bubbles that are highlighted in red indicate areas where our team needs clarification. Open the collaboration by clicking on the message bubble. You can also communicate about this project through this tool. After construction, return to the portal for post-build. Update your application to reflect any changes that may have happened during construction. Double-check that the criteria you intended to pursue were satisfied. Evaluate each criterion item, and if there haven't been changes since pre-build, simply write "no deviations" in the "Describe Deviations" text box. If changes have occurred, note them here. Submit. And once your post-build application is approved, you will receive an email confirmation. If you've indicated that you want a plaque, it will be sent your way. Ready to get started? Create an account today.
Great. Thank you for viewing that video. Let me get us back to the slides. So I thought that gave a pretty good high-level overview of our online portal that will hopefully come together as we move through the session. Right now, I'm about to share with you a link that brings you right to our 2015 criteria website. This is where you can download the checklist, a PDF version of the manual, and access some templates that we have for specific criterion. So in 2015, there are 8 categories in the criteria that are integrative design, location and neighborhood fabric, site improvements, water conservation, energy efficiency, materials, healthy living environment, and finally operations, maintenance, and resident engagement. With our 2-step process as described earlier by Krista and through the video, we are ensuring a thorough integrative design process while providing a framework for optimal location and site features, water conservation, energy efficiency, and property operations practices. And like we mentioned, we wanted to be able to set those of you up for success who are choosing to follow the 2015 criteria. So we'll mainly focus on the pre-build portion and some of the actions you can take now that are low cost, but will help you be able to fully submit your pre-build application before the October 15th deadline. As you saw in the video, our online portal is where you will fill out your application. In the project overview section will require you to provide some basic building information. And then the criteria compliance section is where you'll upload the documents and communicate to us your strategy for compliance for each criterion. The key documents we will focus on are the site plan, which really communicates to us that you're building in an area that has connections to existing infrastructure. We'll also focus on our context map, which shows us the services and transit proximity to the site, our energy modeling form, which shows us your projected efficiency of your site, and then our Category 8 outlines. The outlines show us that all the elements being included in the project will be maintained once the building is in operation. So I'm going to just take a moment to kind of show you where you can find the supplemental document instructions. And what you'll do, let me just navigate back to the site. If you go to our site, which is enterprisecommunity.org/green, you'll come up to this page where the video is for you to use at your discretion. This page is mainly our 2020 information, but what you'll do is you'll scroll down to our 2015 criteria section, and this brings you to the 2015 page. The link I shared with you should bring you right here. And this is where you can see everything that you'll need for a successful 2015 pre-build application. The first step you should take is download this supplemental document instructions and familiarize yourself with what other documents you may be required based on your optional criteria measures. Now let me get back to the presentation. All right, so diving into the site plan. So depending on where you are in your schematic design phase, you may want to connect with a civil engineer to ensure that you can provide a site plan showing connections to existing development and infrastructure, which is a mandatory criterion in our in the 2015 version. And for our rural developers, the site plan is also used to demonstrate the amount of open space by coloring in the areas that are being preserved and providing the calculation on the actual site plan. So that's something to note there. Our context map, this Right now, you can start gathering information for this context map. This basically shows the distance from the center of the project site to the services, which is mandatory criterion 2.5. And for new construction projects where 2.8 is required, excuse me, the context map will show the distance from the center of the site to the transit locations. This is a supplemental document that you can get started on now because it takes very little time and can be mostly done through Google. So getting a head start on this can help you meet the October 15th deadline if you're choosing 2015. So category 8, we make it pretty easy for you. At the time of your pre-build submission, we require outlines for each manual. On our website, we have templates for both the operations and management manual and our resident manuals for you to use. And I'll share the link to them because they're not quite in the same spot as the 2015 page, but I want to make sure you have access to them. So this first link is the resident engagement manual, and the second link is our operations and maintenance manual. They should bring you right to where you can download the template and take a look through. The only manual we don't have a template for is the emergency management, which is 8.2. But this is still fairly easy to get an outline together. And we require 3 areas here, which is communications plans for staff and residents to use in the event of an emergency, useful contact information for public utility and other service providers, and also providing information about the infrastructure and building shutdown procedures. And so when it comes to energy modeling, we realize that you may not want to spend time and money on energy modeling until you get your award letters. But there are some steps you can take now to ensure this doesn't delay your timeline if you intend to use 2015. First, you can identify which pathway is right for your project. This is based on the building typology and construction type. You have the option to pursue HERS, ASHRAE, or ENERGY STAR certification. Then, if you don't have an existing relationship with an energy consultant, you should contact one now. Having this relationship in place will be imperative to ensuring you can show compliance with our energy standards prior to the October 15th deadline. So to recap, what we went over in this section today is you should look over the supplemental document instructions to identify what documents you need for other optional requirements. Then focus on the documents we touched on today, which are the site plan, context map, and category 8 outlines. And as soon as we get off the phone, you should contact an energy consultant and build that relationship now to meet the energy modeling guidelines or requirements. So taking care of these steps now should ensure that you meet the October 15th deadline if you are choosing to stick with the 2015 criteria. And so, Krista, were there any questions that came in the chat, or are there any questions at this moment? If there are, please feel free to shoot them in the chat box.
Thanks, Frederick. No questions are coming in yet, but I'll give people a few time to think. And here we go. One question, Frederick. Does the application, the 2015 pre-build application, have to be approved or just submitted by October 15th? Good question.
So in short, it needs to be submitted, but it needs to be a full application. So if you're in the process and there are some extra clarifications our team needs, that's fine, but we won't accept a shell application and continue the 2015 process from there.
Thanks, Frederick.
You're welcome.
Could you also share how many optional points are required with the 2015 criteria in addition to meeting the mandatory criteria?
Yes. So In addition to the mandatory requirements, teams have to earn at least 30 optional points if they are having a rehab project, or 35 optional points if if their project is new construction. Any other questions about 2015 that we can answer for you all now?
It doesn't look like there are any coming in right now, Frederick. So thanks so much for sharing out about 2015.
My pleasure.
And I'll go ahead and transition to the 2020 part of this hour. So I'd also like to invite you to join me online. So to visit the 2020 criteria, rather than just having a PDF like we did of 2015, we built out a comprehensive website that includes the content. And I just put the link in the chat box, so feel free to join me there. I am going to share my screen and orient you to a few different features of that site. So if you go to the web address that I put in the chat box just a moment ago, you'll go to a web page that looks like this. This is the 2020 criteria site. This is the home page. And what I'd like to share with you is that over here on the right-hand side of the page is the navigation bar where you can navigate between the 8 different criteria categories of 2020. You can visit the appendices that we have here that include the definitions for what is a substantial rehab project, what is a mod rehab, what is rural, what is urban, etc. You can also visit the addenda and FAQ, which we'll be building out in real time over the next several years. And then down here near the bottom, underneath 2020 criteria downloads, you can just download a PDF of the criteria. And then here under templates for certification, you can download the different materials that we'll be asking you to submit when you submit a pre-build or post-build application with the 2020 criteria. So if you click in any of these categories, you'll be brought to the content, and you can scroll down and see that you have the rationale, so the purpose that criterion plays in the program, then the requirement for what a team needs to actually do. Following that, there's some recommendations that you can follow to go above and beyond or to be successful with the requirements. And then there are resources for each criterion after that. So feel free to dive into the full content of the criteria here in this interactive environment online. Also, if you click checklist, you'll go to a shorthand version of the criteria. And near the top here, you can see that you can download an Excel version of this. So you can save it on your own hard drive, edit it over time to see how you are in complying with the mandatory criteria or how many optional points you're getting. You can also download a PDF of the checklist, or down here, you can actually engage with this interactive version of the online checklist. So the mandatory measures, like this first criterion, have a yes or a no. So you can click, yes, I'm on track to succeed with that, or no, I'm not yet. Or for an optional criterion, like 1.5, if you're confident that you're going to achieve the 15-point range with this, you could put 15 points in over here. And if you look above the navigation bar on the right side of your screen, it'll continually in real time update the number of points that you've checked off. So we've got 15 of 40 so far here, and how many mandatory criteria you've clicked yes on. So I'd encourage you to play around with this. When you're editing this online version of the checklist, you can also print and download it if you'd like. So you can save different versions of that and work with your team members in an iterative process with this. This online interactive checklist does not replace the certification portal. This is a planning tool for your use before you get to the stage of submitting in the portal. So what I'd encourage all of you all to do, if you have joined me online and you're looking at this page on your own screen, is to use these filter buttons at the top right of your page to reflect what type of project you work on most often. By picking new construction or substantial rehab or moderate rehab, the different criteria that actually show up on this website in the online checklist and the main criteria will fade away that are not relevant to your project type. So you can pick either new, substantial, or moderate, and then you could also pick either rural or urban, and the same thing will occur. So I'd encourage you to build some comfort level with using this tool if you'd like to use the 2020 criteria. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen in terms of the website, and instead go back and share a few slides with you all. One moment here. Okay, so here we are with the 2020 criteria. We developed the 2020 criteria to amplify the 5 themes that you see here on your screen. So we really emphasized our approach to integrated design in a way that does not silo health from resilience from general sustainability goals, and developed a few new tools to make that more successful for you all. We developed strategies to drive down carbon emissions through our Path to Zero. We doubled down on practices to improve resident health and well-being outcomes. We broadened our approach to water, and we strengthened strategies in the criteria relating to property resilience. So this is all within the context of the 8 categories that Frederick went through earlier, with slight tweaks here and there to the focus of those 8 categories. And what I'm going to do now is walk through a few highlights for each of the different 8 categories, and then we'll pause for a time at the end to see what questions this raises for you all. So we'll start with category 1, and it's integrated design. Within this category, we have a new mandatory project priorities survey. This will help you all shape your project goals with resident input and with using data about your community through Opportunity 360. It really frames goal setting to promote equity and to really recognize climate change and what type of climate hazards your property may be at risk from. So the project priorities survey is included in the templates for certification part of the website that I showed you a moment ago, and is really where I would encourage you to start if you're thinking about using the 2020 criteria, and think about how and when you'd like to get feedback from the impacted community which your project is located in, and thinking about filling out the other parts of that form to really inform your project approach and ensure that your sustainability goals are informed by the people who will be impacted by your property. With the next category, category 2, location and neighborhood fabric, the biggest change in this category compared to 2015 is our new approach to rural projects. So with rural projects, there are no longer requirements for access to public transportation, which we had in the past. Instead, we've replaced those mandatory items for rural projects with a new requirement for access to broadband. And, you know, in the time of COVID, we've seen how crucial access to the internet can be for telemedicine, for school, and for general connectivity to your friends and family. So that's a new item that I think will really open up opportunities for rural projects to succeed with green communities. Also in this category, we've added an approach to looking at sensitive site development through a process that we're calling Ecological Resource Protection Zones, or ERPS for short. So looking at your site through the lens of this ecological resource protection zone will address environmentally sensitive development practices in regards to wetlands and to sensitive habitats. So of anything in this category, if you're planning on using the 2020 criteria for your next project, I'd really encourage you to look at the opportunities for rural projects in a new way here, and then for all project teams, rural or urban, to take a look at 2.1 and the ERPS approach to see how your site development plans match up with the guidelines there. The next category is category 3, site improvements. Within this category, we've amplified our approach to stormwater management given the expectations of increased storm events. There are not significant changes in this category from the 2015 version, although the approach to calculating stormwater has been updated here. So I'd encourage you to check that out. Next, we move along to category 4, which is all about water. And you may have noticed that when Frederick was introducing category 4 with 2015, it was all about water conservation. In 2020, we're just calling this category water because it's conservation and it addresses water quality. So both water quality and conservation practices impact our health and well-being. They impact property operating expenses, and water is just such a limited, precious resource. So we have new water quality criterion here that address lead and Legionella and nitrites and nitrates for wells. And we have a revised approach to water conservation. So in regards to water conservation, all new fixtures in a property, not talking about fixtures that may stay in a rehab, for instance, but all new fixtures in a property must be water sense rated. And we're not looking for specific flow rates with any fixtures in the building. Instead, we're looking to ensure that total water usage for dwelling units is reduced compared to a national baseline. So we have a calculator that we've updated that's also in the templates for certification part of the website that I alluded to earlier. And this calculation method really should allow more flexibility for project teams, especially those working on rehabs of existing buildings. So projects are required to have at least a 20% reduction compared to the national baseline and can receive optional points for less usage than that. And we're expecting that many project teams will take advantage of that. And then the other feature I'd like to call your attention to in this category is a new criterion 4.3, water quality, which has 3 parts. We're addressing the most critical aspects of water quality head on. You'll see an emphasis on the replacement of lead service lines, management of Legionella, and testing of water quality, namely testing of lead. So the quality of drinking water in the U.S. is tightly regulated and generally very safe. However, there are homes with people who live there that are at high risk, and these vulnerable populations are more susceptible to health issues with frequent exposure to sources of lead or Legionella. So we're proud to have included that perspective in the 2020 criteria. I'll move on to the next category, category 5. And again, this is a slight change from 2015, where we call this category energy efficiency. But here with 2020, we're calling it operating energy because we want to emphasize that it's more than just energy efficiency. It's also considering whether or not renewables are right for your project. And it's also recognizing that emissions related to the energy use in your building come from this section from how you're operating the property, but they also really come from how you build the property in terms of what materials you choose. So within this category, operating energy, we have a new path to zero with a series of options that guide teams from basic energy efficiency to zero energy to electrification. So what you see on your screen here is our icon map of the path to zero that's included in the criteria. So we begin on the far left with the orange boxes with criterion 5.1, which is mandatory for all projects. New construction projects will follow 5.1A and certified at Energy Star, while rehabs of existing buildings will follow 5.1B and meet a certain threshold of building performance. And then all projects will report out on their energy use intensity and on their emissions. So, and we have templates for that. That should be pretty straightforward for you to complete. And those are also found on our website in that templates for certification section. So after handling and being successful with the mandatory requirements on this path to zero, projects may choose how far along they'd like to go towards zero with the criterion that you see listed here. So they can do this by reducing energy usage, by installing renewables, or going electric. And if a project is designed to be near or net zero, projects will receive our highest level of certification, Certification Plus. So we'll be highlighting those projects' progress in real time. And I would really encourage you all to think about seeking the Certification Plus level. This is one of the most significant changes with the 2020 criteria, and that we have 2 levels of certification, whereas before we only had a singular level. So that's a snapshot and highlights of Category 5 and the path to zero. And I'll go ahead and move on now to Category 6, which is about materials. So taking a lens in regards to health and environmental impacts when purchasing, installing, and disposing of building materials will improve those conditions in the property. So with 2020 in Category 6, we have a new approach to healthy building materials. We're looking at transparency and optimization criteria for avoiding chemicals of concern. And we have a new approach to environmentally friendly building materials, including considering embodied emissions, the global warming potential, at least, of steel, concrete, and insulation. So we'd encourage you to check that out if you're interested in going deep on reducing the carbon profile of your properties. With the next to the last category in 2020, Category 7, we have healthy living environments. So design, construction, and operation strategies may contribute to a healthier living environment by reducing exposure to toxins, managing the indoor environment, and promoting health through design. And what you see on your screen here are just a list of the titles of all of the criterion in this category. And you can see that we've grouped them in 3 different areas. So this first section is really tried and true. But I would call your attention to 7.6, the smoke-free policy criterion. For all iterations of green communities since our inception, we've had an optional criterion for having a smoke-free policy. With 2020, we've modified that to require a smoke-free policy in all common areas of all buildings in the property and within 25 feet of the perimeter. And then we'll offer optional points if project teams would like to expand that smoke-free policy to all spaces on their property, so including the dwelling units. Then the second bit of Category 7 are largely new criterion. So we've added a dehumidification criterion because we recognize that as you're starting to seek more aggressive levels of energy performance, it is critical to address moisture at the same aggressive rate in which you're tightening the building shell. So we'd encourage you to check that out, as well as the optional criteria regarding construction pollution management and noise reduction. And then this third section is promoting health through design. So we've modified our approach to active design. We've modified our approach to universal design, and then we have a brand new criterion, this last one here, healing-centered design. So if you've done the 2015 criteria before, you've known that choosing an approach to active design has been required, and we're loosening that approach a bit in 2020. And instead of requiring you to do an active design measure, you must pick whether or not you'd like to follow active design, universal design, or healing-centered design, depending on the needs of your project and the people who are living in your property. And in general, with the 2020 criteria, we're pleased to share a partnership with the International Well Building Institute, IWBI, and affordable housing that is 2020 Green Community certified will also automatically earn WELL certification. WELL is a leading tool for advancing health and well-being in buildings globally, And we worked with them closely in creating the 2020 criteria to offer this added benefit to projects. So I'll go ahead and move to the last category, Category 8, Operations, Maintenance, and Resident Engagement. And we generally have the same approach in Category 8 as we did in 2015, with the exception that we've revised the utility benchmarking criteria to align with emerging utility sector best practices. So you'll see more flexibility and more options to comply with that benchmarking criterion than you've seen in the past. So I think you'll be pleased at what you see. So to recap, the 2020 criteria has 8 categories similar to 2015, and yet we've taken a slightly new approach within each. There are mandatory criterion in each of the 8 categories, just like 2015. However, the point thresholds for certification to 2020 are slightly higher than 2015. So you need to get 5 more points than you did in 2015 to certify. So rehabs with 2020 need to get at least 35 points, where new construction need to earn at least 40. So with that, I'll pause and Frederick, see if there are any questions that have come in that you haven't answered in the chat that we should address now, or I'll go in and do a little bit of a recap.
No new questions that we haven't answered yet.
Okay. Great. Well, we are coming close to the end of our time together. So I am going to go ahead and add a link in the chat to an evaluation form, which I'd invite all of you all to fill out sometime today to give us feedback about the information that you've received in today's event, and to share with us whether or not you're planning on pursuing 2015 or 2020, depending on if that's changed since you answered that question in the beginning of today's workshop, as well as what other resources or technical assistance would be helpful. We'd really appreciate hearing that feedback from you all and following up in conversation with you all after today, and especially as you all start learning which projects were awarded in this QAP round. So just to wrap up, I'll emphasize that.
Oh, sorry to interrupt. There were a few questions that came in, so I was wondering if we could answer them before we fully wrap.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Great. So one person came in and asked, if you register under 2015, when does the project need to be built by?
That's a great question, and there's not a deadline for that. So pre-builds do need to be submitted before construction begins, but we don't have a limit in terms of how much time can't be exceeded between when you submit pre-build and when you begin construction. And it's okay if your approach to choosing which optional criteria you're following change slightly between pre-build and post-build. We know things happen during development, and we're comfortable with that. But we don't have a timeline for construction start in relation to the different versions of the criteria.
Great. There's another one here. If a project is 40% new construction and 60% mod rehab, how do I approach EGC certification?
That's a fantastic question. So in general, we would hold the new construction part of the new construction standards, the mod rehab part of the mod rehab standards. You'll find, though, that there are more similarities than differences between requirements between the two. And if, for instance, you're able to build the mod rehab part to the new construction standards, we'd welcome and encourage you to do that. And you could submit as a new construction project if you were following all the new construction guidelines for the whole thing. If, though, you're not able to do that and you'd like to follow the mod guidelines for the mod part of the project, we'd invite you to actually submit 2 different applications in the portal so that we could apply the correct criterion to the correct part of your building. And you could name the project, if your project was called like Apple Tree, you could name it Apple Tree New and Apple Tree Mod so we could track them together. But on the screen here, you can see 3 different links. The first one is an email address to our certification team. So if you'd like to talk about that question about how to split up your project in more detail, we really encourage you to reach out to certification@enterprisecommunity.org, and we'd be happy to talk with you in more detail in regards to the nuance of your project.
And then one last question. For the pre-build stage submission, what level of CD, 50, 75, 90% are you expecting?
That's a great question. And we don't have specific rules and regulations around that. We do expect the pre-build application to reflect the nature of the design of the project. So depending on how far along you are in CDs, you might be able to answer some parts of our criteria better than others. So I'd really encourage you all to take a look at those supplemental document instructions for 2015 that Frederick was pointing out as part of the presentation to see what level of detail you would really need to develop in regards to your own project to be able to answer those items. And if you're still having any questions about what to do there, feel free to reach out to the certification box again and we can answer that one-on-one.
Those are all the questions. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, again, we'd really appreciate your feedback on the eval form, and we really look forward to getting your questions through the CertBox email. And we're standing by to help you all, whether or not you'd like to meet that October deadline with 2015, or whether you'd like to use the 2020 criteria. So, you know, what we're all recognizing at Enterprise, especially in the time of COVID, that affordable housing is more important than ever before, and ensuring that it's healthy and it's going to have low operating expenses and it's going to be resilient is so critical to our sector and to our community. So really appreciate the work that you all are doing on achieving those goals, and thank you for your time today, and we really look forward to working with you on your next project. So Mark, if you have any final remarks, I'd welcome those. Otherwise, I think we can close for today.
Yeah, I just want to thank Frederick, Krista, Lauren, Gabby, and Shelby for all your good work. And yeah, let us know if you have any questions to all our stakeholders.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Mhm.